back live with Andrew Bolt with the Bolt Report.
On with the show in the meantime. 2 weeks ago, the British Met Office declared that Scotland had just recorded its highest ever temperature. Global warming, you know. The city of Motherwell had reached 33 degrees, a real belter, and that made the news here too, in the Sydney Morning Herald and elsewhere in Australia and the rest of the world. But now the Met says, oh, sorry, no record, scrub that, the data seems corrupted. And apparently it's because this ice cream truck was left idling to keep the ice creams cold. Its motor running all day right next to the Stevenson screen to its right that contains the thermometer, and the exhausts were probably heating it up. Today, the prominent What's Up With That climate blog says there's probably a similar problem with the record high recorded last week at Los Angeles at Van Nuys Airport. But again, check where the measurements were taken. From a box just over the taxiway, from a row of parked jets there on the left. You might just see a whole row of them. And they obviously come in jetting hot air. Well, joining me is Alan Moran of Regulation Economics, who's written extensively on our power crisis and the rise of green energy and this green ideology, this global warming one. Alan, thanks for joining me. When you hear examples like this, and people say, oh, it's just a couple, odd, you know, ignore them, but they shake my faith in the measurements generally. What about you?
Well, I think we've seen that case proven in Australia as well, with the modification of the data for reasons which aren't very clear. The fact of the matter is, by the Bureau, the fact of the matter is that we do have a very clear fix on the data since 1979, that is through the satellites, and they're very accurate. They're not contaminated in any way, and we have this data has now been 30 years old. When it was first brought out, people thought, well, you know, given 10 or 12 years of this data, we'll be able to prove whether this global warming is happening or not. Well, in fact, we can see from the data itself, from the measurements of what was forecast to occur and what has occurred, that it's not tracked along the predicted lines at all.
That's right. So if you do a graphic, show a graphic where you see the predictions made by the main global warming body, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, what they predicted, the world hasn't come anywhere near it.
No, and in fact, the temperatures have risen, of course, and they've been rising since the 1850s as a result of a change from what was called the Little Ice Age, a gradual recovery, we say, from the Little Ice Age. But that rise has occurred at the same sort of level increase that we would have expected with or without any global greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So it proves nothing, and indeed it does prove that the horrendous forecasts were actually quite incorrect.
Yeah, and so we have this land temperature thing where it's contaminated, as you say, by things like, you know, city spread, more concrete, more machines, air conditioners, etc., and they affect city temperatures in particularly the global warming scientists say, oh, we make adjustments for that, but the big question is, do you? I mean, we've seen these examples. I just wonder, we've seen, while our Bureau of Meteorology, using its land data, claims, so listen, well, there has been warming here in Australia. Satellite measurements collected by the University of Alabama at Huntsville say there's actually been no warming in Australia for some 40 years. Now, I'm not saying who's right and who's wrong. I'm not a scientist. But what should we conclude from this?
Well, the data from the satellites is much more accurate. Much more. I mean, it can't be contaminated. It's thousands and thousands of different readings have been collected there, and which have basically shown if the temperature has been stable, then it has been stable. And if in fact the land-based data is showing the contrary, then there's something wrong with the land-based data. And you've explained why. I mean, ever since over the past 50 years, as we've had more and more industrialisation, we've got measurements parked near the airports, as we've seen in LA and various other places, which are giving a distorted view. That distorted view is not there with the temperature data measured by the satellites.
And, of course, the Bureau of Meteorology's land data, we saw last year that two unofficial kind of researchers, Jennifer Marahasi and some sort of volunteer bloke, made it admit that at least 2 of its weather stations weren't picking up very low temperatures. They weren't recording them properly. So that data is a question mark too. Now, look, we've actually had the Greens on one side and Conservatives on the other, calling on the government now to have a Royal Commission or a form of inquiry into what's causing our electricity prices to rise. Now, I would have thought, that you're the expert here, I would have thought we've had so many inquiries, we know what's causing them. Go one step back and have a Royal Commission into the global warming science that's producing the policies which in turn help push up power prices. Your view?
Well, yeah, not a bad idea, but the problem with the Royal Commission, you get the answer from the Commissioner often. You pick your commissioners and you'll get an answer along those lines, especially in an ideologically rich subject like climate change. You know, if we had the chief scientists, Alan Finkel, Garno, a whole lot of other people.
I can just see it. I can just see it.
You know, we know what the answer would be. They would be justifying their existing views. Now, you mentioned Jennifer Marahasi or Ian Plimer, or you've had on your programme Bill Kinnenman. These are very senior and excellent meteorologists and scientists. If it was them, then it wouldn't be a bad idea at all. But essentially, with the present Prime Minister and the head of his department, I don't really see any possibility of a neutral person being appointed to a Royal Commission like that.
Look, I'm afraid that, Alan, you are correct. But that means the country's, in a sense, enslaved by this ideology with little hope at this stage that we can find a way to work our way out when so many careers and so much money has been invested into assuming that global warming is true and trying to convince the rest of us of it. Alan Moran, thank you so much indeed for your time.
You're welcome.